On debate, Senator Coyle.
Happy Valentine's Day, Senators. I rise today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people to speak at second reading to Bill C-22, an act to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing what is promised to be a generational game changer, the Canada Disability Benefit. Honourable colleagues, I would like to start my remarks today with a story of kin, a story about my kin. When I was 10, my mother Betty was pregnant. There were 6 of us, and were we ever excited? We 3 girls all wanted a little sister, and my 3 brothers were rooting for a little brother. On Saint Jean-Baptiste Day in 1965, our little brother, John Patterson, was born. And in the end, what mattered was that our family had an adorable new baby. I felt like Mom had had the baby just for me. I was over the moon. Johnny was so sweet and so much fun. I played with him and took care of him all the time. I just loved him to bits, and I still do. My brother Johnny was a very likable and active child. He was smart, funny, and athletic, and he was outgoing. Johnny completed high school and went on to study in a number of fields: broadcasting, recreation, later computers. He worked in the hospitality industry, including stints in Banff, worked in childcare, got involved in radio, theater, and improv. Along the way, when I'd already moved out of the house and started my own family, my dear youngest brother developed chronic and serious health difficulties, mental health conditions, commencing at the age of 14. These took years to diagnose and treat. And of course, those were very turbulent and often painful times for Johnny as he tried to finish school, work, pay the bills, have good relationships, and make life a life in the ways that we all want to do. It was all just so much harder and at times impossible for Johnny because of his health. Like many Canadians, Johnny has bipolar disorder and severe anxiety. In his case, these conditions are very debilitating. Today, Johnny's full-time job, quite frankly, is being healthy. And I can tell you he works very diligently at that. He volunteers in the community, visits our almost 96-year-old mom, swims to stay physically well, and works to keep up relationships with a close circle of friends and family. Johnny is a kind and good person who was dealt a hand that included a really tough disability. Increasingly unable to work at paid employment, it sure is hard to keep a job when you can't sleep at night and are experiencing other severe symptoms of anxiety and depression. Johnny was initially refused eligibility for the Ontario Disability Support Program, but was eventually approved after being hospitalized in 2001. ODSP pays $1,230 per month for a single person like Johnny. In my province of Nova Scotia, he would be expected to live on $950. While it is good he receives some modest income support, Johnny says that the financial stress of being on disability is hard on his mental health. Colleagues, it's stressful not having enough money for even the basic necessities of life. Ending the financial insecurity of people like my brother, Johnny, my kin and yours, and reducing poverty, which is disproportionately high among disabled Canadians, is what Bill C-22 and the Canada Disability Benefit is all about. It's also about restoring people's dignity. My brother would tell you that the stigma around mental health is hard to shake. Johnny still feels shame and guilt, thinking that somehow his situation is his fault. Colleagues, the Canada Disability Benefit will provide much-needed material support to people like Johnny, and it could also send an important signal to them that our society understands, respects, and values people living with disabilities. Senator Cotter, the sponsor of Bill C-22, eloquently and comprehensively introduced us to the essential content of this important bill in his second reading speech last Thursday. Bill C-22 is a framework legislation that establishes the Canada Disability Benefit. It's aimed at low-income, working-age persons with all types of disabilities. It's the cornerstone of Canada's Disability Inclusion Action Plan and its highest priority. According to the legislation, most of the benefits design elements will be established through regulations, and those will be developed in collaboration with people living with disabilities. As the slogan rightly states, nihil nobis sine nobis, nothing about us without us, nothing about disabled Canadians without disabled Canadians at the table. Colleagues, when studying the legislation, I was interested in how this new benefit was connected to related policies and initiatives such as guaranteed livable basic income, medical assistance in dying, and the new national health care deal. During my first year in this chamber, I joined the all-party anti-poverty caucus led by our former colleague, Senator Art Eggleton. We studied a number of poverty reduction measures, including the now-cancelled Ontario Basic Income Pilot. Asked at one of our meetings whether the government would consider playing a role in establishing a guaranteed livable basic income for Canadians, Minister Duclos, then Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, was very clear that the government intended to actually focus its poverty reduction efforts on targeted groups of the population, children through the Canada Child Benefit and vulnerable seniors through the Guaranteed Income Supplement. We know that the Canada Disability Benefit is modeled on the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors. $1,026 is the maximum GIS payment for single pensioners at the moment. We don't yet know what the CDB amount will be. Colleagues, when I spoke on Bill C-7, the medical assistance in dying legislation, I cited a letter from disability advocates which stated there is a real risk that those without adequate support networks of friends and family, in older age, living in poverty, or who might be further marginalized by their racialized, Indigenous, gender identity, or other status, will be more vulnerable to being induced to access MAID. Those fears were widely held. Colleagues, a number of disability advocates have indicated that the Canada Disability Benefit, if well-designed and appropriately resourced, could be an important response to those fears about MAID. The third related matter is the new healthcare deal currently being negotiated between the federal government and the territories and provinces. Sister Elizabeth Davis, co-chair of the Newfoundland team that produced that province's health accord plan, told the CBC that new funding proposed by the federal government would allow the implementation of half of that province's health accord plan. But without finding ways to address the other half, the plan won't succeed. The other half, which addresses the social determinants of health, is perhaps more important and needs even more attention. One of the findings of the Newfoundland Health Accord is that social, economic, and environmental factors play a role in 60% of health outcomes, while the actual healthcare system accounts for 25%, and a person's genetic makeup, the final 15%. Sister Davis says that poverty reduction is crucial. Again, an obvious link to the Canada Disability Benefit. Colleagues, the case for disability benefit for Canadians in need is both clear and compelling. We know that 22% of our population consists of persons with disabilities. In my province of Nova Scotia, it's 30%. 40% of us have family members with disabilities. You've heard about my brother Johnny. We know that 41% of people living in poverty in Canada are disabled, with 10% of seniors with disabilities living in poverty, and that disabled people make up over 50% of people facing food insecurity in Canada. The Vancouver Province headline on February 9th last week declared that a disability diagnosis is a prescription for poverty. Colleagues, that is a shared national shame. The Disability Without Poverty Organization's submission on Bill C-22 provides even more detail on poverty experienced by persons living with disabilities. They point out how poverty among their members has deepened during the COVID pandemic, and how the impacts of inflation and the housing crisis have disproportionately impacted disabled Canadians. Colleagues, the preamble of the Poverty Reduction Act states that Canada aspires to be a world leader in the eradication of poverty, and the Act establishes the ambitious poverty reduction target of 50% below the level of poverty in 2015 by 2030. So, colleagues, with this national aspiration clearly spelled out and the obvious case for creating a much-needed financial benefit for disabled Canadians, we have been asked by people in the disabilities community to now do our part to ensure that Bill C-22 moves to royal assent with haste. People living with disabilities need financial relief, and they need it now. Bill C-22 was passed unanimously in the House after detailed study and with amendments. Our job is not to unduly hold up the bill, while at the same time, we need to work efficiently to fulfill our responsibility to ensure that we have legislation that enables the creation of a robust Canada Disability Benefit, which will have the intended outcomes of significantly reducing poverty and supporting the financial security of persons with disabilities, one which clearly responds to what people living with disabilities are asking for. They're asking the federal government to, and I list, prevent clawbacks of benefits by provinces and territories, prevent clawbacks by private disability insurance companies, ensure the coming into force and money actually flowing to beneficiaries happens within the year. We need strict deadlines for every step of the development and the implementation process. Ensure benefit amounts are adequate to actually take people above the official poverty line. Have eligibility criteria which is clear, fair, and developed in consultation with persons with disabilities. Develop a two-track process for determining eligibility. People eligible for provincial and territorial benefits should not have to prove again that they have a disability and live in poverty. Ensuring the working age target group doesn't leave out disabled seniors. I'm a senior, I'm still working. Ensure there is proactive outreach to all persons who could be eligible. The most vulnerable don't always file taxes, as we heard Senator Faure mention, and some may not even have social insurance numbers. They need to be reached out to. Ensure the right to appeal refusal exists and that there's a tribunal for that and that mechanisms for complaints are in place. And include the most critical details in the bill itself rather than leaving so many details to the regulations. So this is what many are asking us. The accessibility for Ontarians with disabilities calls Bill C-22 a well-intentioned, weak bill. They say we still don't know how much the benefit will be, who will be eligible for it, or when the government will start paying it. Some others are expressing greater trust in the government and the promised co-development process. Honourable colleagues, my brother Johnny was 55 when the promise to create the Canada Disability Benefit was made in the September 2020 speech from the throne. In 4 months, he will turn 58, already almost 3 years since that promise. Honourable Senators, let's move this transformational bill to committee so our colleagues can investigate whether and how it can best deliver in a timely manner on its important promises of financial security, poverty reduction, and dignity. Promises to my brother Johnny and to other Canadians living with disabilities. Honourable colleagues, let's ensure this promise generational change starts now. Thank you. Merci. Walalio.